Hello there and welcome. This is lesson 4, part 2 of the music theory basics. And in this lesson, we'll look at chord progression for specific emotion. We'll be looking at emotions like happy, sad, and hopeful. Where we'll do this in both the major and minor scale. For simplicity, let's start with the C major scale. I have the diatonic chords of the scale laid out. For happy progression, we'll choose the major chords in the major scale, which are the first, fourth, and fifth degree. And in part 1 of this lesson, we established that a common way chord progressions are put together is following the movement of the subdominant, moving to the dominant and then to the tonic. So we can play the major chords as the 4-5-1, in which the fourth is the subdominant, the fifth the dominant, and then the first the tonic. Alright, if you have a progression like this, you can duplicate the bass note to add depth to it. And now we invert note. The trick for doing inversion is that we look at common notes the chords share in the progression and we move them close. And now we can move the C downwards. Or maybe we revoice it like this and move it upwards. Next up, let's look at sad progression. A simple formula to guide you with a sad progression is that we start with a minor chord to get a moody sound, and then we leave the progression unresolved, meaning we keep the first degree in between the progression. So we can do a progression like the 6, 4, 1, 5. We just invert note to glue them together. Also, the velocity matters to get the moody feeling out. For a sad progression, always allow the instrument to hit a lot more softer by reducing the velocity. Alright, this sounds sad as compared to this, where all the velocities are hitting at its peak. Alright, let's do another example. Let's start with the minor second chord, and then we can go to the first, sixth degree, and the fourth degree, and we have our sad progression. Alright, next up, let's look at hopeful progression. The rule is we keep the progression resolved. That means we always end on the tonic first to get a sense of conclusion. So let me just keep the tonic first at the end. Now we can do the 4, 5, 6, 1. Alright, so far as we keep the tonic at the end, we can switch up the progression in any given order and we'll still have our hopeful progression. So here is the 6, 4, 5, 1, and it still sounds hopeful. Alright, next up, let's look at chord progression for emotions in the minor scale. Let's switch the scale to the minor scale, A minor for simplicity. Well, these are all the diatonic chords in the minor scale. So for happy progression, we established that we select the major chords of a major scale. Well, if we apply the same rule to the minor scale, you get the shape of the 1-4-5 chord of the major scale. So for a happy progression, I'll just suggest that you always work in the major scale. Next up, let's look at sad progression in the minor scale. Well, with this, we use the same formula. We start with a minor chord, and then we leave the progression unresolved. So we can do the 1-6-3-7. And we can just change the rhythm by doing Alt plus U to chop the notes up. And here's our third progression. Again, for a third progression, what I like to do most is to go chronomatically down the scale. Well, this still follows the rule. We began with a minor chord and then ended on the 5th degree, which allows the progression to be unresolved. Well, with a progression like this, if I'm ending on the 5th degree in the minor scale, I like to change the progression to the minor harmonic. With that scale, it has the 7th degree raised. So we can make the 5th degree a major chord. This gives a strong sense of tension and then release when it resets on the tonic first. So when you listen to it, here's our third progression. Well, last but not the least, let's look at how to make hopeful progression. With hopeful progression, we established that we have to end on the tonic first. So here's the progression, the 3-7-5-1. So these are just guidelines to help you make chord progression for every mood. Next up, let's look at the circle of fifth, a map of music. Alright, let's begin by understanding how the circle of fifth is constructed, and we'll go from there to use it to make our chord progression. Alright, what I'm basically doing is that I'm selecting the C major scale, and I'll be using the ghost note method to select our scale, yeah. So looking at the circle of fifth, outside of the circle are major chords, which are built on the 5th degree. With our scale selected, if I select the C note and I count to the 5th note of the scale, that's the 5th degree. And also the 5th degree is 7 steps away from any root note you select. So when you keep counting, you just reach the major chords outside of the circle. Now you can see that it corresponds to the chords of the circle of fifth. Alright, inside of the circle are minor chords, the relative minor of the major scale. We'll be using the same movement, we'll be moving in fifth, and then you get your minor chords outside. It's just counting 7 steps away from the root. Now we know how to construct the circle of fifth. How do we use it to make our chord progression? So let's just pick any note. Let's say the C, for simplicity. And what I like to do is that I select notes which are close to it, so the F and then the G, and I'll use its relative minors. So we have all these chords lined up. If we want to make a third progression, we just use the same rule. We start with a minor chord and then we leave the progression unresolved. So that's how basically you can use the circle of fifth to make chord progression. That will be all for this lesson. The next lesson, we'll look at what is melody and how to create simple tunes.